Welcome to the Scott Townsend Show, brought to you by Dietzo Man Productions.
Hey, this is Scott Townsend. Welcome back to the Scott Townsend Show. And today I have with me managing partner of Insight Partners, Corey Walker. Corey, how's it going?
Very good. How are you today, Scott?
Doing great. Corey is the, managing partner, OKC advocate. He's a recruiting ninja. Maybe you can explain that a little bit later. He's from OU. I'm from OSU, so we'll just let that one go.
We can still be friends.
We can still be friends. I want you to win every football game except one. Yeah.
There you go. Exactly.
And Corey was introduced to me, referred to me by the associate professor at OU's Price College of Business, Ron Bolin. A friend of mine, he was on another podcast that I have, and all around great guy. Love Ron, and I really appreciate him referring you to the show. So
absolutely,
welcome.
Thank you.
So, the purpose of this podcast, a lot of people know, is just to help people. This started out during the COVID, during the outbreak, and it was kind of like a lifeline to help people, pass along motivation, inspiration. Just, people were losing jobs right and left. I mean, it was a national wipeout. And so if there was something that I could say or do to help people have a better life, learn a life hack, or, just they can walk away from listening to this on the treadmill or on their bicycle, or if they're watching, and walk away going, well, I learned a little something there that I might be able to apply. So I'm glad you're here because of your expertise in recruiting.
Absolutely.
And so, let's talk about, what I'd like to talk about today is putting your best foot forward in the job seeking process.
Sure.
I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Sure.
So
quite a few.
I'm sure you've seen a lot that was great and some not so great, and
equally as bad as good, for sure.
I'm gonna turn it over to you. I'm gonna quit talking. So what do we need to do to prepare ourselves for the job search, looking for that dream job?
Great question. Just to reiterate, so I'm Corey Walker with Insight Partners. We're a recruiting firm based in Oklahoma City, do primarily small business recruiting. So companies that are kind of 200 to 300 or less. We do have an arm of business that does also engineering, IT, as well as management consulting. But my thought process on kind of the job search is it never ends. I think the best time to be looking for a job is obviously when you're not desperate to find a job, but I think we're not always necessarily in that boat per se. So, I'll kind of speak from maybe just a holistic approach versus, being unemployed versus employed. But I think first and foremost, I think the most important thing is to always have your resume ready, always have your LinkedIn profile updated. I hear a lot of times from candidates, I don't have a resume updated. Oh, my LinkedIn's not updated. But my question is you never know when that person's going to reach out to you. I forgot the statistic, but probably over 50% of candidates are being placed by LinkedIn now. So I think that's the number one resource, that you really need to be on, just to be found, if you will. And LinkedIn actually has some back end things you can use, which is kind of nice to actually say that you're open to work, which is a new feature that came out during COVID, which will actually kind of put you at the top of the list, with a lot of recruiters, which I think, highly recommend, because you're going to kind of come to that top of that search list. But I think having your LinkedIn profile, your resume up to date, so when you do get that call, you meet that person. It's all about networking. It's all about who you know at the end of the day. It's a human relationship. The resume can kick open the door, but you're going to get the job. But another thing I recommend too, kind of pre-employment search, is everybody always has that dream company they follow. I've got my top 10 in Bartlesville, or my top 10 in Oklahoma City I want to work with. Follow them on social media. I know that sounds too rudimentary, but on LinkedIn, if you follow them on LinkedIn, you're going to get updates, new positions, you're going to know what's going on with that company. And a lot of times, a lot of those positions and things, you can even make connections with hiring managers, really be able to network kind of the old fashioned way from that standpoint. But that also gives you a lot of material if you ever do get an interview with that company to really speak of, during that search as well, from that standpoint. So that's kind of my recommendations, kind of pre-search. I think once you get that interview, obviously kind of I say the resume goes out the window a little bit. A lot of people kind of hang their hat on their resume. They'll fib on their resume, not be able to back it up in an interview. So I think really the biggest due diligence is really kind of prior to the interview. So a lot of people, will go through a website, look at kind of the high points. But I really recommend, not only researching the company and the person you're interviewing with, but really go a layer deeper. So a great example is look at their core values, look at their mission statement, look at their other open positions. What else are they hiring for? What directions are they headed? Be able to talk about core values in the interview, be able to talk about, anybody can look on LinkedIn for 30 seconds and say, oh, Joe Schmo went to OSU and he's been here at this company for 5 years. And their office building is in downtown Oklahoma City. Well, that doesn't tell me anything about how you fit the job. So
Right.
I think a lot of people need to turn that narrative around and kind of really realize that interviewing isn't natural for anyone. First of all, no one wakes up and one day is like, I want to be a professional interviewer. So no one
else get to interview today.
Yeah. And no one else, wants to be a professional interviewee as well. I think people don't realize that you're nervous walking into an interview. Generally, the hiring manager is too. And I think if you're able to provide that value proposition of really putting your kind of sitting in the hiring manager's seat and kind of understanding what value can you bring to the table, and sitting in that seat, and even how you can succeed at the position. We have a lot of candidates that, they always ask the prototypical, hey, what's your biggest weakness? The typical answer we get is I'm too hard on myself. I procrastinate.
I'm such an overachiever. I'm just, I
but
really go.
What value does that add is that doesn't tell the employer anything. So, same thing with strengths. I'm punctual, I'm hardworking. Those aren't strengths, those are attributes. So I really challenge people, even, the weakness question, think of a mistake you've made, think of something, that's really tangible to help you connect with the interviewer, because I think a lot of times, a lot of people in an interview just sound very scripted, very, robotic, if you will.
Give me an example of a mistake that you could use in this, what you're talking about.
that I can.
Not your mistakes, but just make something up, or maybe you want to pull from personal experience.
I've actually had candidates go into a job and interview, and the employer will say, hey, what made you apply to XY company? And they'll say, oh, I just saw the job posting and I was posting to 100 other jobs. It's like, that's the worst answer you can provide. Or a weakness question, providing something and then not showing how you're growing from that. A lot of people say, oh, I'm hard on myself. Okay, does that mean you're going to sit in the corner and scream at yourself, or does that mean that you're developing or becoming more self-aware and listening to feedback and things like that, if that kind of makes sense?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does someone going through their strengths finder strengths qualify? If someone said, what are your strengths? And if I said, for one, ideation,
sure,
I could say ideation, but then what you're saying is I need to follow up with. And so what that does is that helps me come up with ideas. I'm really great at coming up with ideas, pulling two disparate things together to make a new, creative suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. You really have to make the theoretical more, more realistic. I think some of those, you can send an interview. Well, according to Strength Finder, my strengths are, that's not an in-depth answer. You can maybe lead with that, but that has led to me having direct success in that. And another thing we see is people get asked interview questions and kind of speak very theoretically, like, oh, I can do that. Oh, I studied that in school. Whereas I think in this job market, while it's very candidate driven, I think that's going to change slowly, and it's even currently changing. I think you really need to speak from actual experience, really be able to provide examples. And the biggest kind of thing that we see, especially candidates that maybe have been around 10, 15 years, is remembering what they did 8 years ago, having that example. So I always recommend take the job description, take your resume, and kind of go bullet point by bullet point and almost make like a laundry list of the things that you've done and the examples you can use. By no means carry that into the interview, because then you're going to sound scripted. But I can barely remember what I had for lunch yesterday. How can those people remember, what they did on a project 8 years ago? But it's amazing when you kind of get that ball rolling, because the resume innately is not a great representation of your background because you want it to be a page or 2 pages, 3 pages at most. I can't put everything I've ever done on a resume. So
Right.
that goes out the window when you start the interview. You shouldn't have to look at your resume. You should know your background. And I think finding that laundry list, kind of helps just get the memory going. And especially if it's something that's more applicable to the job, a certain software, certain Excel skill, or, something like that. And in addition, I think some people also, may be lacking areas of experience in a certain area. And I always recommend, act like you're in the job before you go in. For instance, if it's an IT analyst role, they want heavy SQL experience. You don't have that heavy SQL experience. Maybe the weekend before, go and take a tutorial. You'd be amazed the amount of movement you would have in the interview process to show that you have that drive and, things like that as well. Because I've done that myself. I interviewed for a recruiting oil and gas job way back in the day and knew very little about oil and gas, but, I researched it all weekend and used the applicable experience I had to, gain that position. So.
It's funny you bring up know their core values and mission statement. I went into one interview one time and I trotted out the mission statement, that I've memorized, and the general manager said, "Wow, I didn't even know we had a mission statement."
So know your audience as well. I mean, if you're interviewing for a field tech role, your field tech manager probably doesn't know, what the mission statement is, but HR would care. That's a good idea. But I think it's like, anything. I mean, have the bullet in the gun. Just because you don't have to fire it doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared for it. A lot of people rely on like salary.com or glassdoor.com for interview questions and stuff like that. But we have to remember it's very specific to the hiring manager, not to the company. I mean, every hiring manager looks for something different. Just because one hiring manager wants someone that's bubbly, cares less about the IT skills, doesn't mean the next one won't, or whatever the case may be. So,
what else about during the interview would you recommend?
Yeah, so the actual interview itself, I think, as I mentioned, it's not really natural for anyone. I think really be yourself. I think the number one feedback I get sometimes is they were too canned, they weren't themselves. I think there's some dangerous in that, as you might get turned away from some positions, but wouldn't you rather get turned away for some positions that, aren't really truly based on who you are and what you're looking for, and really kind of aligning those things, because at the end of the day, you'll be looking for a job again in 6 months to a year, from that standpoint. But I think during the interview, I think also one thing is ask good questions. I have so many candidates that go into an interview and they have no questions. It's like, what do you mean you don't have any questions? You're here for an interview. So always challenge everyone. I know sometimes you go through repetitive interviews where you've asked the same question, but a great example is, what makes you stay here at X and Y company? I mean, everybody's answer may be a little bit different, and you'd be surprised what information you may gather about, hey, the manager might be happy, but everybody else isn't, and that might tell you something a little bit from that perspective. But I think always be prepared. I always say, bring a couple copies of your resume with you. You never know when their printer breaks or if they're running from a meeting and didn't have a chance. Always bring, something to write with your questions already prepared. Some people always ask to bring, should I bring work examples and things like that? I think that's something very appropriate to ask prior to the interview. Normally a recruiter or HR will say, especially if it's a creative role, they'll want to see that. But in some other industries like financial modeling, you may want to show that, but always ask that. Don't necessarily bring it, because you show up with a huge binder and you kind of overwhelm, your manager from that standpoint. So,
right.
Yeah.
It seems also that I don't get this or hear this a lot. And it's a mindset that I have not had, and that is, if you're really confident, then it seems like the interview is for you. And so, we throw all the weight and all the power to the hiring manager, when really maybe it should be all about you. And you come in and I'm looking for a job. I want to see if this is the right fit. I should be able to just have all kinds of questions, and be able to explain why I'm good at what I do and how I can help you. But I think too often we're scared of the hiring manager, and she has all the power, when you're the one that's looking, and you might get up and just say, you know what, I mean, you wouldn't do this during the interview, but you walk away going, that's just not for me, but instead of being desperate, looking for anything.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah,
make
it's
any
interesting.
sense?
It's interesting you say that, because I would say prior to the pandemic, that was very much the case. I call it kind of a hiring manager dominated interview. But we're seeing, when it's a candidate driven market, it very much becomes a two-way conversation. And I would say interviews have become less formal over time. And I think they're becoming less formal. I mean, the days of wearing a suit and tie to an interview, I think, are almost dead.
That was going to be one of my questions.
Yeah.
Do people wear suits anymore during?
I mean, if you're going to work for a bank, sure. But
Yeah.
I've had candidates show up in a suit and tie to a manufacturing facility, and they've asked them to take the tie off.
Yeah.
So I always recommend a step above, if they're business casual, we're business professional. But I think people care a lot more about the soft skill set and what's behind the interview, because it is really common that the best interviewer gets the job, but the best interviewer isn't the best person for the position. And I think we're seeing kind of an evolution of that. And I think as it's a candidate driven market, people are realizing, just human welfare and human well-being is such an important part of, the societal shifts we've seen the past 3 years, that it really has infiltrated interviews. I have some clients that don't even bring the resume into the interview. They just have more of a conversation. Hey, this is who we are. Tell me about you. And I think I'm seeing that more. And I think that's going to be more beneficial to the candidate, because hiring managers were very stoic, very like, hey, we have 20 minutes, 30 minutes. We're going to talk about me. We're not going to talk about you. Whereas I'm seeing kind of the opposite. I'm kind of seeing absolutely that the candidate currently do have a lot more power, but that's cyclical. 2007, 2008, it was very client driven, then early 2000 or late 2010s, it was very client driven. So it's just amazing how it kind of ups and goes. But I think some of the things I've outlined, I think apply no matter what the market is, but absolutely, I'm seeing a big shift in kind of the concentration of the interview.
So after the interview, is there anything else you want to mention about during the
I
interview?
don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
So after, okay, the interview's over, I go to the car. It's the next, what do I do now?
Yeah, I highly recommend always sending a thank you email. I would say probably only about 20 to 30% of professionals actually still do that.
Which is amazing, because everybody says send the thank you note, but really most people don't do that.
I would say there's definitely a positive correlated relationship between number of years of experience and more likelihood to send a note. I mean, somebody with 1 to 2 years experience, but they're barely even sending email thank yous anymore. I mean, I don't think a written note is necessarily necessary, because by the time it gets there, hiring is moving so fast, it won't get there for 4 or 5 days. I always recommend within 24 hours, send a thank you note. If you interviewed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, don't send an email at 5, or send it the next day. But that's your last opportunity to really offer up anything else. But don't send a candid, thank you for your time, I'm the best candidate. Give them something else that isn't on your resume, that they didn't have in the interview, whatever the case may be. And you'd be really surprised, especially in positions that are customer service oriented, sales, anything that's interacting with an external or internal stakeholder. It does make a huge difference for sure.
So when you do the thank you note, maybe what you're saying is maybe bring up something that you weren't able to elaborate on during the interview, or
if you can,
if you can.
Yeah, or just restate your interests, restate how you feel like you could hit the ground running. Also allow any opportunity for, if you have any more questions, concerns, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my information. Because a lot of times in an interview, you may not be able to exchange business cards, or they may not necessarily have your contact information just because you're moving so quickly. But I think, leaving that door open, I think helps a lot. I think it also helps you get feedback faster, especially if you're working with a smaller company. Usually they're going to respond back to that email with some sort of timing or anything. But to go back to the interview, I always recommend at the end of an interview, just to kind of ask those questions. Hey, do you have any more questions for me? Any concerns I didn't answer? What do you expect to be the next step and timing? Because if you don't understand that, you're going to go crazy sitting at home, not understanding that, hey, you're their first interview. They've got 2 more weeks of interviews before you're going to do something. So for your own mental stability, I think I recommend doing that. So,
right. Also, after the interview, you send the thank you note, and just to tag on what you just said, and that is, when should you follow up? I mean, okay, the thank you notes sent, what's proper? in following up? Should I call?
Yeah.
Should I email? Should I call in the next 3 days, week? What?
I generally think about a week, just for a soft email. I think a phone call can be a little abrasive, and you don't want to turn off the client or turn off the hiring manager if you're down to one or two. You call after 2 days, that could be pretty abrasive. So I think respect their timeline if they give that to you in the interview. But I think if they don't provide a timeline, I think a soft, within a week, if you interview on Tuesday, do it the following Wednesday, or something like that. Or if a lot of times they'll even give you the license to follow up, if they say, hey, feel free to follow up in a week, do that. But, they've given you permission and license to do that. So do that. So.
Is following up a good sign to the hiring manager that this person, do people follow up?
Yeah, that you're still interested. Yeah, I think so. Because again, the percentage of people that follow up are a lot less. It just kind of goes slowly down with the more follow-up. Now you can't do too much follow-up, right? Like I'm gonna send you an email 2 days after and then a week after and then give you a call, and it's like, okay, this person, because you don't want to come off as desperate, because at the end of the day, in an interview, people that are desperate don't come off as confident at the end of the day. So I know you need a job and you might be unemployed, but you don't want to hate your job as well. So
don't send cookies and don't get a billboard across the street from the HQ. And
I've seen, you always see those stories that are like, that go viral on someone standing on the corner in a suit with handing out resumes or something. But that's cool and all, but you don't want to be questioned about your lunacy. So,
Oh man, well, that's all really good. I mean, it sounds very practical, common sense, but you just gave 2 examples of easy things to do that most people don't do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's in the thank you note, follow up. Maybe think about the interview. I remember I did an interview one time. So funny. Oh my gosh. I walked in, I'm amped up. I've had coffee. It was out of state. They flew me down and had coffee that morning. Man, I was ready to go, baby. I had all the info and I was gonna tell them how great I was and how I could help them, So anyway, all morning long interviews, then we go to lunch. That's great, And then after lunch, they gave me an office to sit in until my plane left. And I was just wore out. I mean, I was spent, and I got ready to leave. And they said, well, I hope you have a great trip back, and thanks for coming down. And whatever I said at that point was incomprehensible. I don't even know what I said. It was kind of like my brain just snapped. I mean, everything. It was just, oh my God.
Yeah,
I didn't get that job, actually.
It's funny. One of my best stories I'll tell about myself is I was interviewing right out of college, had pulled a chair out to sit down in front of it and missed the chair. So I literally fell on pardon my language, my ass right on the ground. I didn't get that job either.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this for 15 years. I still make mistakes when I interview people or interview. I mean, it's we're all human. And I think at the end of the day, you got to remember that. You got to remember the person you're talking to is human. And a lot of times they're just as tired from interviewing as you are. Because if they've interviewed one, they've interviewed 5 or 6 or 7. If they have multiple positions open, they've been doing this too. So kind of keep that in mind. I mean, don't monopolize people's time. I'd say that's the other thing is we have some candidates, it's booked for an hour, they take 2 hours. It's like going over a little bit's okay, but once you start exceeding about 50% of the allotted interview time, you're a talker. So.
Yeah. And it might be good to ask them, my time is up, the hour's up.
Yeah, that's a great to respect them is to say, hey, I just noticed we're running a few minutes over, do we want to go and wrap up? Do you have more questions for me? I think having that self-awareness and that self-check is huge because other companies are going to do it because it's kind of awkward to be like, hey, can you stop talking so I can go to this meeting, so.
Man, I think it sounds like a good sense of humor is a good thing to have too. Just take a deep breath, go in, do your best.
You're not going to die.
Yeah, they're not going to kill you. That's absolutely right. Oh man. Well, Corey, I really appreciate your time and your insight. And if anybody has questions or wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, they can email us, which is recruiting@insightpartners.com. That's NCITE partners with an S.com. So
located in Oklahoma City.
Yes, sir. But we do work nationwide. So.
Good deal. All right. Well, Corey, thanks a lot. And it'd be fun to have you back sometime. So hope you had a good time and will come back.
Awesome.
I'm sure there's a lot to talk about. Oh, here, I showed here's my resume, but I put it on foam core.
Oh, there you go. Oh, okay.
So it's like a plate.
Yeah.
But anyway, well, for Corey Walker, this is Scott Townsend. Thanks for watching, listening to the Scott Townsend Show. Have a great day. Everything's going to be all right. And we'll talk to you later.
The Scott Townsend Show is a Dietzo Man production. For more episodes, visit the Scott Townsend Show YouTube channel, listen on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.